Welcome along to this video where we're going to be talking about EPCs, Energy Performance Certificates, but in a slightly different context because there is an issue creeping up on landlords. I'm joined by John Steward from the RLA. And John, when I first posted about the Energy Efficiency Act, I think about 3 years ago, that it would become illegal to let a property with an E grade or lower from April 2018, the response from our community was, oh, I've got ages. But actually, we're only just over a year away now, and this is a real threat to landlords with poor energy efficiency properties, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real risk for landlords with properties with F&G ratings. They need to attain an E by April 2018 for new lets after that date, and all properties will have to meet an E standard by April 2020. So yeah, it did seem a long time ago. The Energy Act was passed 5 years ago. The regulations were laid almost 2 years ago now. So people thought they had plenty of time to address this issue. The government haven't made it easy, however, for landlords who want to meet the obligations. There was supposed to be an exemptions register up and running in October last year, where landlords who either had properties that couldn't be brought up to that standard no matter what improvements they made, where those improvements were very expensive and outweighed the benefit in savings from fuel bills, or where perhaps things like planning permission or listed building status or a conservation area status would prevent them from doing the necessary works, they would be able to register for an exemption. But the exemptions were very much tied to the Green Deal, and of course the Green Deal has bitten the dust, and now the government has to come up with a replacement for the Green Deal and reframe the legislation so that all landlords don't automatically qualify for an exemption because they can't get Green Deal funding. So there's a real issue there for the government to address in replacing the Green Deal and ensuring that there is an opportunity for landlords to access funding to make these energy efficiency improvements, or at least put some sort of cap on the level of spending that landlords will be expected to undertake to make energy efficiency improvements, and that's what we're going through at the moment. So the exemptions register has been put back till October this year, and we're waiting to see what sort of scheme the government comes up with to replace the former Green Deal funding.
Indeed, and I think what you've just summarised shows how much confusion there is about this whole Green Deal issue, that the parent company has been dissolved. There are a few pockets of companies that do have access to funding around the country, and I think really, and I don't know if you agree, but landlords should be looking at their EPC certificates now. If they are an E or F banded rated property, they are going to have to take action, aren't they?
It's F&G properties. E's the standard that they will have to attain.
Right.
But it is going to be creeping legislation. There is an ambition that all private rented properties will be a C rating by 2030, which again is only 13 years away. It seems like a long time, but that also creates problems for landlords. Do you do creeping improvements and bring it up to an E and then a D and then a C, or perhaps it'll actually be cheaper to go straight from an F rating to a C rating in the long run? So there's a number of issues there that landlords have to consider. But the most pressing one is we don't know where we're at yet with exemptions in the exemption register. We don't know where we are with replacement funding schemes, and we don't know where we are with a cap or a limit on how much landlords would be expected to spend. And as the clock ticks down, there's less and less time for landlords to undertake these repairs or to evidence the fact that their property qualifies as an exemption, and that's something the government really needs to address. We're pressing for the commencement date to be pushed back a little to allow these issues to be resolved. We don't think it's satisfactory that landlords are being left in limbo, if you like, while the government dithers over what to do over energy performance certificates and ratings. So it's a very real concern for landlords of F&G properties. But what we have to remember is that this affects around 8% of private rented properties. The government estimates perhaps 300,000 properties. Most of the properties are actually solid wall type properties. They're turn of the last century. They tend to be pre-1940 construction and will be very expensive to bring up to that E standard. It may well be that a number will qualify for exemptions, but there's also an issue with the EPC measurement for solid walls. There's been some work done, and it would appear that solid walls are actually more efficient at retaining heat than the current assessment scale suggests. So we estimate there's perhaps 100,000 properties who will automatically move up a band if they were reassessed once these new findings are taken account of. So there's two things we're waiting on. We're waiting on the assessment scale being recalibrated to take account of the solid wall construction being more thermally efficient than previously thought, and that will mean when that adjustment is made that owners of these types of properties could get a new EPC assessment done, which may lift them up to an E without having to do any work at all. And then we're waiting to see what the government's going to do over the replacement for the Green Deal and what that means for landlords and how landlords will be able to register for an exemption where appropriate. But of course, we all want to see good quality homes within the sector, providing safe, secure, legal accommodation for tenants that is affordable to heat. Fuel poverty is a big issue across all property sectors, and it does need to be addressed. Our question is how much of that should be carrot and how much should be stick. We're seeing quite a lot of the stick at the moment, while the carrot of funding has disappeared.
Yeah.
So we were pressing the government on a range of measures. We want to see the old landlord energy savings allowance reinstated at an enhanced level to encourage landlords to undertake these repairs. We want to see energy efficiency measures be treated as maintenance and repairs as opposed to capital spend and improvement.
Because that would help a lot for landlords affected by Section 24 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, if a landlord has to borrow to make these improvements, then the interest on that borrowing will not be a deductible expense. And if landlords want to get relief on their expenditure, particularly something like solid wall insulation, which can cost upwards of £7,000, £8,000, £10,000. That is reclaimable, but only against capital gains when the property is ultimately sold, and only at cost. So the cost of that improvement isn't. There's no inflationary measure there. If you spend £10,000 doing that work, that's what you can knock off on sale for capital gains purposes. So we'd like to see the taxation system change so that landlords can actually claim relief in that expenditure at point of spend. We think that there's a bit too much of the carrot of the minimum standards and the enforcement of those minimum standards, and not enough of the encouragement for landlords to bring these properties up to standard. And then there is the issue that there will be some properties, because of their age, their construction, that will simply never be able to be brought up to a standard. And what do we do with those properties?
So I guess our best advice under all of these circumstances and confusion is firstly to be aware that this issue is coming down the pipe, and I'd say secondly, John, that if you are going to replace a boiler, then replace it for an A-rated boiler with a long guarantee, because it could actually be, as you said, a way to start moving towards this better energy efficiency. And actually tenants are increasingly asking how much a property costs to run. So as energy costs inflate, then they're going to be looking more and more at how energy efficient the property is. So actually it does make sense to start taking action in this regard.
Yeah, well, 2018 is not far away for people who are looking to offer new tenancies, so they will need to find a way to get to that E rating sooner rather than later. The worst thing to do is to leave it right up until the last minute and then discover that you can't get the trades people available to do the work for you. And the other thing, as you mentioned, is to try and think ahead. There's no point in spending £2,000 now to get you up to an E rating, where perhaps spending £2,500 now would get you up to a D or a C. So go for the highest energy efficiency rating that is practical and you can afford within your current budgets, because that will protect you in the longer term.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for sharing those insights, John. And we will be reporting more on this issue of EPCs, and we will be updating property tribes as the legislation becomes clearer. And of course, there's the RLA advice line as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. We send out weekly newsletters to our members and subscribers that keep people up to date with everything that's happening in the private rented sector and beyond. And for our LA members, our advice team are always there, an excellent resource who you can take almost any problem to. They'll have heard it before.
Fantastic. Very good stuff. Thank you very much for joining me, John.